Welcome back to MystifyMe, True Crime and Enigmatic Investigations, where we uncover the darkest and most perplexing mysteries the world has to offer. Today, we're diving into a chilling crossover of two haunting worlds, true crime and horror films. Have you ever watched a horror movie and wondered if it could be real? Well, sometimes the scariest stories aren't fiction at all. In this video, we'll explore 5 disturbing true crime cases that inspired some of the most iconic horror films in cinema history. From gruesome murders to unsettling paranormal events, the real-life stories behind these movies are often even more terrifying than their Hollywood adaptations. Let's unravel the truth behind these spine-chilling tales and see how the line between fact and fiction gets blurred in these horrific inspirations. Our journey begins in the quiet rural town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, where one of the most nightmarish figures in true crime history lived, Ed Gein. To the people of Plainfield, Gein seemed like an odd but harmless recluse. No one could have imagined the horrors hidden behind the doors of his secluded farmhouse. In November 1957, the investigation into a missing local woman led police to Gein's home, and what they found inside would scar them for life. Gein had not only killed 2 women, but he had also been exhuming bodies from local graveyards for years, collecting corpses to fuel his sick obsession with human anatomy. His home was filled with gruesome artifacts made from human skin and bones, masks, lampshades, even a full bodysuit fashioned from the skin of his victims. Gein's horrifying behavior became the blueprint for some of horror cinema's most infamous characters. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, was inspired by Gein's disturbing relationship with his overbearing mother. Gein was so attached to her that after her death, he began creating a female suit in an attempt to become her, much like Norman Bates' unhealthy fixation with his own mother in Psycho. Bates's fractured personality, pretending to be his mother, is a direct parallel to Gein's warped psyche, driven by grief, isolation, and deep psychological trauma. But Gein's influence didn't stop there. In 1974, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre took the more grotesque aspects of Gein's crimes and ramped them up for maximum terror. Leatherface, the film's terrifying villain, wears a mask made from human skin, a horrifying detail pulled straight from Gein's real-life practices. In fact, Gein was known to have made several masks from his victims and corpses, along with other gruesome trophies, including skull bowls and a belt made of human nipples. However, while these films depict Gein as a relentless killer, the reality is slightly different. Unlike Leatherface, who goes on a killing spree with a chainsaw, Gein's confirmed body count was lower, 2 victims. Most of the remains in his home came from his grave-robbing activities, not from a string of murders. Gein wasn't the crazed slasher Hollywood portrays, but that doesn't make his actions any less disturbing. The shock of what police found, furniture upholstered in human skin, a collection of body parts and the remains of the missing woman, was enough to solidify Ed Gein's legacy as one of the most terrifying criminals in history. What makes Gein even more unsettling is the way he blended in, hiding his monstrous activities behind the mask of a quiet, unassuming loner. He didn't fit the mold of a typical killer. He was shy, reclusive, and known around town for doing odd jobs. But his hidden obsession with death and decay went undetected for years, allowing his dark fantasies to grow unchecked. Both Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre amplified Gein's gruesome habits for dramatic effect, but even the real story of Ed Gein is enough to haunt anyone who hears it. His legacy forever changed how we see the quiet neighbor, and his influence on the horror genre has endured for decades. To this day, the thought that someone like Gein could exist, someone capable of such unspeakable acts while maintaining a veneer of normalcy, is a chilling reminder that true evil often hides in plain sight. Next, we head to a seemingly idyllic home in Amityville, New York, which would become infamous for the horrors it concealed. At first glance, 112 Ocean Avenue appeared to be the perfect suburban dream, but behind the picturesque exterior was a nightmare that began with a gruesome crime and escalated into one of the most notorious paranormal cases in modern history. The story starts on November 13, 1974, when 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. took a rifle and systematically murdered his parents and 4 siblings as they slept in their beds. DeFeo claimed to have heard voices urging him to commit the murders, and though his defense team argued he was insane, DeFeo was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder. The DeFeo murders sent shockwaves through the quiet town of Amityville, but the story didn't end there. Just over a year later, in December 1975, the Lutz family moved into the home, hoping for a fresh start. However, their time in the house was short-lived. Within 28 days, they fled in terror, claiming the house was haunted by malevolent spirits. George and Kathy Lutz described experiencing strange odors, cold spots, and unexplainable noises. The most terrifying claims involved levitating beds, demonic faces appearing in the walls, and green slime oozing from the ceilings. The Lutz family was convinced that something evil lingered in the house, and their story quickly became a media sensation. The events that unfolded in the Amityville house became the foundation for the Amityville Horror film in 1979. The movie depicted the Lutz family's struggle against supernatural forces, adding intense dramatization to their already terrifying account. Hollywood leaned heavily into the paranormal elements, portraying the house as a portal to hell, complete with demonic entities, violent hauntings, and ghostly apparitions. The film captured audiences' imaginations, and the house at 112 Ocean Avenue became forever linked to the idea of a cursed, haunted dwelling. But here's where reality and fiction start to diverge. While the Lutz family stood by their claims, many skeptics argued that the haunting was a hoax. Some believed that the Lutzes fabricated the story to capitalize on the notoriety of the DeFeo murders, seeking fame and fortune through book deals and movie rights. The fact that subsequent owners of the house have reported no paranormal activity only fueled the idea that the haunting might have been an elaborate ruse. The truth, however, remains elusive. While the supernatural claims are contested, the real-life tragedy of the DeFeo murders is undeniable. The brutal slayings of 6 innocent people are far more haunting than any ghost story. The house may not have been cursed by spirits, but it was certainly tainted by the bloodshed and darkness left behind by Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s rampage. What makes this case so captivating is the way it blurred the line between a real-life crime and a supernatural legend. Whether or not you believe in the haunting, the Amityville Horror continues to provoke questions about the nature of evil. Was the house truly cursed, or was it simply the site of one family's horrific downfall? The chilling combination of fact and fiction has cemented Amityville as one of the most iconic and debated horror stories in modern history. Few true crime cases have gripped the public's imagination quite like the Zodiac Killer, a name that still sends shivers down the spines of those who remember the terror that swept across Northern California in the late 1960s. The Zodiac Killer's reign of terror is unique, not just because of the brutality of the crimes, but because the killer himself taunted law enforcement and the public, leaving cryptic messages, ciphers, and terrifying letters that would inspire fear long after the murders stopped. The Zodiac's first confirmed attack occurred in December 1968, when 2 teenagers were shot and killed in Vallejo, California. Over the next few years, the Zodiac would claim responsibility for at least 5 murders, though some suspect he may have killed many more. His most infamous tactic was sending coded messages and letters to local newspapers, mocking the police for their inability to catch him and boasting about his crimes. The Zodiac's identity has never been uncovered, and to this day, he remains one of America's most infamous unidentified serial killers. It didn't take long for Hollywood to draw inspiration from this elusive figure. In 1971, Dirty Harry hit theaters, with Clint Eastwood starring as the titular character, a tough, no-nonsense cop tasked with bringing down a killer who is terrorizing San Francisco. The film's antagonist, Scorpio, is clearly based on the Zodiac Killer. Scorpio, like Zodiac, taunts the police with cryptic letters, demands ransom money, and orchestrates a chilling game of cat and mouse. Even the setting, a terror-stricken San Francisco, mirrors the real-life fear that gripped the city during the Zodiac's killing spree. But where Dirty Harry diverges from reality is in its portrayal of law enforcement's success. In the movie, Harry Callahan relentlessly pursues Scorpio, eventually bringing him to justice in a high-octane showdown. The film paints a picture of a manhunt with a clear resolution, a satisfying conclusion that the real Zodiac case never had. In reality, the Zodiac Killer was never caught, and the case remains one of the longest-running unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. Despite numerous suspects over the years, none have been definitively linked to the crimes. The Zodiac Killer case continues to fascinate and frustrate, in part because of the mystery surrounding his identity. Unlike other notorious serial killers, who were eventually apprehended or killed, the Zodiac vanished into the shadows, leaving behind more questions than answers. His letters, some still unsolved to this day, are a testament to his cunning, as he seemed to relish in outsmarting both the police and the public. Though Dirty Harry gave audiences the satisfaction of seeing justice served on the big screen, the real-world story is far more chilling. The idea that someone could kill with impunity, taunting those meant to protect the public, and then disappear without a trace, plays on our deepest fears. The Zodiac Killer not only left behind a trail of victims, but also a legacy of terror that Hollywood couldn't resist. And while Dirty Harry may have wrapped the story up with a neat, action-packed ending, the true horror of the Zodiac case lies in its unresolved nature. Even decades later, the thought that the Zodiac Killer could still be out there, living an ordinary life or perhaps having taken more lives, reminds us that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. In this case, reality is far more disturbing than any fiction Hollywood could ever create. For many, clowns are symbols of joy and laughter, bringing entertainment to children's parties and circuses. But after the heinous crimes of Wayne Gacy came to light, that image was forever tainted. Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown, was a sadistic predator who preyed on young men and boys, committing some of the most horrific murders in American history. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy lured at least 33 young men and boys to his home, where he tortured, sexually assaulted, and murdered them. By day, Gacy was known as a local businessman and community figure who even dressed up as Pogo the Clown to entertain at children's parties and charitable events. But behind this harmless facade lay a monster. Gacy buried most of his victims under his house, hiding the evidence of his horrific deeds until a single mistake led to his capture. Gacy's case is chilling for several reasons, but perhaps the most disturbing aspect is how he blended into society so easily. He wasn't the stereotypical stranger in the dark alley. He was a trusted community member who hid his monstrous actions behind the painted smile of a clown. His ability to mask his evil behind such an innocent persona is what has made his case one of the most terrifying in modern criminal history. Wayne Gacy's crimes inspired multiple fictional depictions of evil clowns, none more famous than Stephen King's IT. Although Pennywise, the central villain of IT, isn't directly based on Gacy, it's hard to ignore the parallels between them. Pennywise, like Gacy, lures children into his grasp with a friendly, innocent appearance before revealing his true, terrifying nature. In IT, the clown is a shape-shifting entity that feeds on fear, but the core idea of a seemingly harmless clown concealing a horrific evil draws from the real-world fear that Gacy instilled in the public. Similarly, the 1998 film The Clown at Midnight leans into the fear of clowns as something more sinister. The film's villain is a clown with a dark past who stalks and murders his victims, drawing on the same psychological terror Gacy created. Gacy transformed the public's perception of clowns from harmless entertainers to figures of dread, and his crimes forever tainted the once innocent image of the circus clown. However, while Gacy may have inspired the horror genre's depiction of murderous clowns, the reality of his crimes is far more disturbing than anything Hollywood could produce. Gacy's victims weren't faceless, nameless characters in a slasher film. They were real people, sons, brothers, and friends, who were brutally taken from their families. Many of Gacy's victims were young men who were struggling to find their place in the world, and their lives were cut short by a man who took advantage of their trust. Gacy was eventually caught when one of his intended victims managed to escape and lead police back to his home. Upon searching his property, authorities found the bodies of 29 victims buried in the crawl space beneath his house. The scale of the murders shocked the nation, and Gacy was convicted of his crimes and sentenced to death in 1980. He was executed by lethal injection in 1994, but the dark legacy of his crimes lives on. The story of John Wayne Gacy serves as a grim reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. His case continues to haunt the public imagination, not only because of the brutality of his murders, but because of how easily he deceived those around him. Gacy's double life as the killer clown shattered the idea that clowns are always figures of innocence and joy, turning them into symbols of terror in both fiction and reality. Our final case takes us into the eerie world of religious horror, where the lines between faith, mental illness, and the supernatural blur. The 2005 film The Exorcism of Emily Rose was loosely based on the real-life exorcism of Anneliese Michel, a young woman from Germany whose tragic death in 1976 led to one of the most controversial legal cases in modern history. Anneliese Michel was raised in a deeply religious Catholic family. In her teenage years, she began experiencing terrifying episodes that her family believed were signs of demonic possession. She exhibited violent outbursts, spoke in strange voices, and reported seeing frightening visions of demonic faces. Despite receiving medical treatment for epilepsy and psychiatric disorders, Anneliese's condition only worsened over time. Her family, convinced that her illness had a spiritual cause, turned to the Catholic Church for help. In 1975, two priests, Father Arnold Renz and Father Ernst Alt, were granted permission by the church to perform an exorcism on Anneliese. Over the course of 10 months, she endured 67 exorcism sessions, sometimes lasting several hours. Anneliese's condition continued to deteriorate as she refused food and water, believing that the demons would not allow her to eat. By July 1976, she had died of malnutrition and dehydration, weighing only 68 pounds at the time of her death. The aftermath of Anneliese's death led to a high-profile trial that brought the issue of exorcism and mental health into the spotlight. Her parents and the two priests were charged with negligent homicide, and the case sparked intense debates about whether Anneliese was truly possessed or simply suffering from severe mental illness. The court ultimately convicted the priests and Anneliese's parents of manslaughter, though they received relatively light sentences. The case highlighted the dangers of allowing religious belief to override medical science, and it remains a cautionary tale to this day. In The Exorcism of Emily Rose, the story is reimagined as a blend of courtroom drama and supernatural horror. The film presents both the spiritual and scientific explanations for Emily's condition, leaving viewers to decide whether the events were the result of demonic possession or a tragic failure to properly treat a mentally ill young woman. While the film incorporates many of the real-life details of Anneliese's case, it heightens the supernatural elements for dramatic effect, portraying terrifying physical manifestations of possession and leaving viewers with a chilling sense of ambiguity. But the true story of Anneliese Michel is far more heartbreaking than anything Hollywood could depict. It's a story of a young woman caught between two worlds, one of religious devotion and one of medical science, who ultimately paid the price for the failure to reconcile the two. Her case remains a haunting reminder of the consequences when mental health is misunderstood and religious fervor overpowers reason. Though the film may leave audiences questioning the nature of possession, the real horror lies in the preventable death of a young woman whose suffering was misunderstood. Anneliese Michel's tragic fate continues to provoke debates about faith, mental illness, and the limits of medical science, and serves as a stark contrast to the dramatized fictional version that reached theaters. So, there you have it. 5 disturbing true crime cases that served as the twisted inspiration behind some of the most iconic horror films ever made. While Hollywood often adds its own flair to these stories, the reality behind these terrifying events is far darker than anything you'll see on screen. From killers who wore masks made of skin to exorcisms gone tragically wrong, these cases remind us that the scariest monsters aren't always fictional. They sometimes walk among us. What do you think? Which of these true crime cases did you find the most chilling, and how do you think the movies compare to the real-life horrors? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the next investigation. This has been MystifyMe, True Crime and Enigmatic Investigations. Stay safe, and remember, sometimes the truth is scarier than fiction.